And then on the next slide, today we'll be covering DJI's disaster relief program and how this has been implemented across the United States. We'll be going over COVID-19 response by North American agencies, their successes and lessons learned. And finally, we'll end with some resources that can be used as you navigate the best practices for moving forward amidst the pandemic with regards to UAV use. We'll occasionally give you an opportunity to further interact with our panelists by answering some polls. So to kick this off, let's go ahead and get started with our first poll. All right, and this should be popping up for you. What type of department are you with? Please go ahead and select one of those answers. And we'll give you 30 seconds to go ahead and fill that in. All right, looks like they're still coming in. Give it a few more seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and close this out. All right, so it looks like a good number of you are all with public safety agencies. We have about 47% that are joining us outside of a public safety department. So we'll have a couple more of these throughout the webinar as well, so be on the lookout for those. We'll go ahead and let you know when those pop up. It'll be a similar process for each of those. I would now like to introduce our panelists. Romeo Durscher is the Senior Director of Public Safety Integration at DJI. Over the past 5 years, he's not only helped scale up DJI's public safety enterprise reach, but worked with numerous public safety departments and organizations across the US and Europe to learn about the needs within public safety. This has allowed Romeo to bring together many of the drone ecosystem partners to help create hardware and software solutions for the demanding environment that public safety operates within. Romeo has also actively deployed to several natural disasters and brought back firsthand lessons he has learned. Our second speaker, Wayne Baker, is the Director of Public Safety Integration at DJI, bringing his experience from 20+ years in the fire service to the leading drone manufacturer. Chief Baker retired in the capacity of Fire Chief. During his tenure, he successfully advocated for and implemented a UAV program at his department. He helped to train countless other agencies across the nation on the beneficial uses of UAVs in public safety. As a founding member of the North Texas Public Safety UAS Response Team, a public safety UAS team made up of agencies and personnel from across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He actively flew as a UAV pilot deploying across Texas to numerous fire and law enforcement incidents, as well as several major disasters, including flooding events of 2015 Hurricane Harvey, as well as several tornado incidents, most recently the Dallas tornado event of October 20th, 2019. I'd now like to give a warm welcome to both Romeo and Wayne.
Denise, thank you so much for the introduction. This is Romeo. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I know we have individuals calling and dialing in and participating from across not only the United States, but even outside the United States. I hope this finds you well. Thank you for being part of this. I'm sure a lot of people are webinared out as much as we are. This is our 7th webinar in 14 days, but this is important information we're learning, and we want to share all of this with the people that hopefully can benefit the most from all of this technology. Now, I would like to get to the next slide. However, now I am experiencing technical difficulties, and that is just very fitting. So as I'm trying to navigate through all of this here, let me just talk a little bit about why did we have a disaster relief program. And it came out of the need to really support localized and regional disasters such as the wildfires or hurricanes, earthquakes, floodings, and tornadoes. We're seeing these events happening across the United States. And when I deployed to several of those incidences, one thing that always struck me was that, first of all, there's always a need for more equipment, for more expertise. Sometimes things go wrong, so we need back-end support, maybe through service or technical support. And so it was really a way to get better support to these regional events as quickly as possible and allow departments and entities that are approved to be and integrated into the structure at those events to better utilize what is available. We announced the disaster relief program at DJI Airworks last September in Los Angeles, and as I mentioned, really with the focus of a regional disaster. We had our official first activation right after the Nashville tornado in early March. And one of our partners, Exxon, supported local public safety entities. And through that, we also supported Exxon and those responding departments. A perfect example of one of those regional events. But then less than 3 weeks later, we realized that we see this pandemic impacting now also the United States, and we wanted to scale out this program to cover more than just one region. And that was a big process to do because we had never imagined to do something at this scale. But the teams came together internally, and on March 25, we announced the disaster relief COVID-19 program to support departments across the nation. And we opened it up for departments to submit their requests with information on what they are thinking and planning on doing in regards to COVID-19, because we wanted to properly evaluate that these platforms would not just sit on a shelf or stay in a box, but they would be actively used to impact and benefit not only the departments, but the communities in a positive way. And within less than 7 days, we had hardware already at those locations, thanks to our enterprise channel partners across the United States that also got activated and helped us get those units into the right hands in a very, very quick turnaround. Now, we tried to really go over every single application and find out exactly how this technology will be used, can help, but also somehow help get a better picture of where are these really needed. And we were able to support by now 45 departments, of which 22 were police departments. We have 9 fire departments, 8 county sheriff's offices and 3 state patrols, 2 county public safety agencies, and 1 hospital. And all of them had not only a real need, but they had also very good use cases. And more importantly, they were willing to help the entire community by sharing their lessons learned and best practices. We added this pay it forward component to it so that we could gather proper information and share it with other departments so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. We selected these states, the agencies in these states. It wasn't quite random. What Chief Baker and I were trying to do that end of March timeframe, we were trying to look at also data available of where are those hotspots and where are those areas that really need additional support. And I took this snapshot in the middle of April just to showcase that what we did 2 weeks earlier by reviewing and trying to gauge which areas will be more impacted than others and then cover those areas, we did a fairly decent job in ensuring that platforms will go to where they are really needed.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and bring up our next poll here. You should be seeing this in just a second. The question asks, do you already have a UAV program in place? Check yes or no, and we'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and fill this in. All right, we have just a few more trickling in. We'll give you about 5 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and get this closed. Looks like 63% of you already have a UAV program in place. Fantastic.
These polls are extremely helpful for us to gauge who is our audience, and to also learn more about that audience that is here today, giving us a much better idea of who are we talking to. And I'm actually very excited to see that we have a big portion of the audience that is outside of the public safety community. This also helps as part of educating the broader audience of what this new technology can do for public safety and ultimately for the communities. So it appears that every time there's a poll, I have issues, but I now know the workaround. So one thing that we do want to stress is it's of big importance to really think through any sort of new use cases that come around. And that's a lesson that we learned very early on in 2013, 2014, during the Nepal earthquake. There were a lot of volunteer teams that deployed to Nepal to help, to do good, and they were utilizing drones, but it wasn't coordinated, it wasn't integrated as it could have been, and it created a lot of additional side issues. And so we robotics and UAviators, Patrick Meyer is a fantastic leader in that space. He said, look, we got to come up with a way to better do these humanitarian missions. And so we robotics not only put together a flow chart now to help us and departments to go through kind of like a decision process, but back in the day, they created a document that we also have in our resources later on called the Humanitarian Code of Conduct. In essence, the goal of both is that we identify the solution and its outcome and benefit, and really think through before we deploy in a new use case. There are certain questions we want to ask ourselves, and we're going to look at that diagram in a second, so that we can better judge what will the benefits be, and will there any side issues that may arise from utilizing drones. So that Humanitarian Code of Conduct and the best practices in humanitarian drone missions really also apply to this pandemic, because we are trying to utilize this technology for the greater good of the community. There is a humanitarian aspect on it, and this drone code of conduct was developed initially in 2014 and refined over the next couple of years with the participation of over 60 entities, from the UN to UNICEF to the Red Cross and DJI. We were involved. I was involved in the structure of this humanitarian drone code of conduct, and I think it's utterly important. But looking at this flow chart, this is a really, really great reference point, and it's in essence a few questions that leads you hopefully to the orange box. And it's very important and very helpful to go through this. Questions like, have you spoken to those who will benefit from the use of this drone technology, and see if it's actually needed? If you can answer with yes, then you move along. Are there already other solutions solving that problem you're trying to solve? If yes, then maybe look at utilizing those practices or technologies. And then also very important, do you understand the legal, privacy, and policy framework that relates to that particular solution? And if you say no, then obviously there's got to be a little bit more research to be done. But if you end up in that orange box, it's a much safer opportunity to deploy a new technology and get a successful benefit out of it. So we wanted to include that here because it is extremely helpful. We will have a QR code and link to this information in the resource section as well. As I mentioned, one of the big additional pieces of the disaster relief program for COVID-19 was a pay it forward component, meaning that departments that we were supporting, we asked them to participate in two things. Number one, help us gather operational information challenges, success stories, lessons learned, and allow us to put together this documentation and this information for other departments. And the second component was to share with us the use cases. How did they use the drone? What kind of additional third-party applications they may have used? What was their camera setting? Whatever it may be, all the best practices, so that we can put a document together that can help other departments to, in essence, learn and not have to reinvent the wheel. And today we will be releasing version 3 of that document. We keep adding information to it to make it a very useful document. And a little bit later, you will have an opportunity to get that downloaded, or it's also in the handout section on the webinar. So from this survey, I'm going to hand it over now to Chief Baker so he can look into some of the data points that we have gathered up until yesterday.
Thank you, Romeo, and good hello to everyone. And as Romeo was having an issue, now I am. Let me back up here. I apologize for that. So as Romeo mentioned, we wanted to not just immediately help those that we were going to be getting aircraft to, but we also wanted to help down the line agencies learn and adapt. And so some of the information we've started to gather so far is, since operations have started with these agencies, we've now had 332 COVID-19 related flights. And this is based on the 55 responses so far from the agencies. We're asking that they weekly fill in the survey if they can. And as of now, again, we have had 55 surveys. We're also trying to get a gauge of how operations are being conducted. As you can see, 13 of the agencies have Part 107. Then we have 6 that have Part 107 pilots with approved waivers, 5 under Certificate of Authorization, 10 operate under both Certificate of Authorization and Part 107, and then 9 that operate under both of those in addition to waivers. As you can see, 6 of the agencies do not participate in our qualified entities program, 39 do. Romeo will discuss this qualified entities program in depth a little more and with links, but just quickly to let you know, this is the program that we remove the geofencing off the aircraft for public safety agencies. Again, one of the big questions we have is what benefits have UAVs provided your department in the response? We've had one agency mention that they've used it for community morale, actually flying at birthday parties, which was a unique and interesting way to help keep spirits up. 2 agencies have used speakers. I believe we're going to be discussing that a little bit more later on. 2 assisted with missing persons and a suicidal subject. 4 agencies as of yet have not found uses for COVID-19 response. 6 for homeless outreach. We're going to discuss this a little more. This is a really great use case. 7 to enhance their non-COVID operations. 12 for use for setting up monitoring testing sites. Again, we'll discuss that more in depth. And then 21 for situational awareness. And speaking of the homeless outreach efforts, Chula Vista Police Department in the San Diego area has done quite a bit with their drone program, helping their homeless outreach team to locate and communicate with this vulnerable population that is oftentimes encamped in rugged terrain. We also saw recently Fort Worth Police Department doing something very similar with an encampment in again in terrain that's not easily accessed. So they're hard to reach areas. In this case, Chula Vista staged resources for this population at exits to these canyons that they were camped out in. And they utilized the speaker system to broadcast public health messages in English and Spanish, and to advise them that they had resources set up that they could come to these aid stations and get some food. They had hygiene kits, face masks, and they were also had county health and mental health nurses there that were able to provide screenings for them and assist them. And they, in fact, they did it again just last week, the end of last week, and had really good success again. But based on the first use, they covered 8 square miles in 3 hours. And normally that would take them 2 days on foot. Plus, again, it's rugged terrain and difficult areas to access. They've published some videos on this, and you can see the link here. Again, Friday they did this again, and they were able to reach even more people who were very appreciative of the help being provided to them. Fremont Fire in California utilized the program for testing site planning. They set up 2 COVID-19 test sites, and they were concerned about the long vehicle lines and the wait times, and as well as they had a pedestrian walk-up line. And so they wanted to monitor that for better flow and see what needed to be adjusted to reduce that if they could. They were able to get a vehicle count, so that helped them get a little more efficient in their response as they were bringing people through the testing line. And then they were also able to fly along these lines using the speaker system to give information on estimated wait time and other useful information, again, from a distance. So they're not putting anyone at undue risk. And again, here is some of the, you can see in the center of the picture, you can see the pedestrian traffic. And then on the right, you can start to see some of the vehicle traffic as well. Here again is vehicle traffic they were able to help monitor and coordinate. And
thank you, Chief.
Romeo.
Yes, thank you, Chief. Let's keep going with some deeper looks at some of the departments and what they have been doing with this technology. The next one I want to talk about is a very do-it-yourself type of approach, and Linn County Sheriff's Office in Oregon, they started to plan for delivery of small items like just a bottle of medicine, a mask, or gloves to a certain area, small items. And what they did is they came up with a solution that can be used to drop something off on the porch, on the driveway, or in a safe location. Again, right now, what departments are trying to do is that they're trying to minimize or maximize the distance between their public safety officials and potentially somebody who has been infected, is under quarantine. And so this was one of those nifty designs that they came up to with a big gulp cup, one that you get at the 7-Eleven, some zip ties, key rings, a line, and a carabiner to really put this together so that when you touch down with that device, that it will turn over, in essence, spill out that bottle or those masks onto the driveway or the porch, and then the drone can go off. These are the kind of innovations or applications that public safety can come up with because of how innovative their thinking is. And they haven't used it as of last week, but in case they do need it, they have this available. And this is just an example of how some of these departments are thinking ahead, that if that moment comes when we need to have that solution, we know how to do it. Now, looking at Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office here in California, this is another pre-planning mission. And Last week, I was on a virtual discussion room with Interpol. Interpol is the international police organization. They're overseeing member countries of 194 around the globe, trying to bring a standardization in the way police is doing its work. And obviously, they also have a big drone interest. And on this virtual discussion room, we talked about these use cases from across the globe. And one thing that stood out is that here in the United States, departments are doing much more work in regards to pre-planning. Before an incident happens, they already utilize the new technology to get either orthomosaic imagery of one of the testing sites, or in this case, a field hospital, while other areas around the globe, they're not quite using it that way because they're still more on a, let's use it for an incident only instead of a pre-incident or a post-incident basis. But going back to Coco County, a federal medical station with about 250 beds was set up, and they utilized the drone to document this station, this medical station, with a interactive 3D map and obviously also a 2D orthomosaic map before it was opened up. And they also then internally flew the drone to get some videos of the layout. And then with both sets together, they were able to not only outline egress and ingress points, but to set up a proper parameter around it. And then during operations of that federal medical station, also keep situational awareness of what is happening around this station or this medical facility. So another very good use case that shows that pre-incident planning used with software to create these either 3D maps or orthomosaic models can really allow for up-to-date information and maps that are at very high resolution and allow for additional annotations or measurements in post-production. Another very interesting use case that have come up, again, to be more prepared in case it is needed, is the increased patrol and a change in the deployment methodology. Most departments around the globe use drones as a tool to get on scene and then deploy. And that could be from a fire incident, that could be an accident, collision reconstruction, where you get to that scene, you deploy it, and you do your job, and that's that use case. We're seeing one department here in the United States, Chula Vista Police, that has a very different methodology, and that is to use the drone as a first responder. And that means the drone takes off the moment the 911 calls comes in from the police station and goes to that 911 location, and in most cases arrives there before ground units are even on scene. And that allows already for an incident commander or a overwatch captain to see what is happening, to either cancel the call, maybe it's not needed anymore, or to potentially also request more units. In this particular one, they wanted to plan ahead to have potential capabilities to overwatch key areas, regions, or closed business parks, because with shelter-in-place orders, they usually don't really impact the criminals because crime doesn't take a break. And so those oftentimes then also provide great opportunities for break-ins into especially closed business parks. And so this particular department wanted to be just ready if they counter these kind of situations, that they had a proper deployment methodology. And what they were doing is they were setting up and saving waypoints flight missions over the center of a street to cover one of those certain areas. This way they could patrol a certain business park from one location within line of sight, but see much more of what is happening in case they needed to respond or prevent criminal activities at those areas. they set it up large or small enough to cover a certain area with one battery. Battery obviously is still one of the limiting factors of most current drone technology. You get up to approximately 30 minutes per flight. So you can cover huge areas, but you can cover enough areas in one flight that allow you to get a much better picture of potential criminal activities. And then having the ability to see that overview right at the vehicle or stream it to the incident command really allows for a much quicker decision-making process. So, Chief, what have we learned so far?
Thank you again. One of Romeo and I's big goals in this is getting information to learn from, and then after we've processed that, be able to flow that out. And so some of our early lessons that we've learned is, just as we recommend with anyone that wants to start a new UAV program, or just as you go back to that We Robotics flowchart, it's very important to identify your objective first. What's the goal of the mission that you're trying to achieve, and what are those benefits? And in the fire service, we oftentimes use that risk versus benefit model. It's very similar to that. It's that, you know, the outcome we want at what benefit. So once you've identified that, one of the things to consider actually with that is the public and media perception. We're in a rapidly evolving situation, and so it's very easily we react and we respond. So it's easy to do that, and in harder hit areas, a lot of times that's what's been happening is we're reacting and responding. Other areas not as effective, or having more time to plan and think through. But you do need to take that media and that public perception component and impacts into account as you're trying to decide on how to utilize this technology. Your operations are going to need to be dynamic. You know, not just UAV. We've also seen that response models have changed around the nation for police, fire, and EMS. The way officers operate with you know, violator contacts to we have engine companies that aren't chasing ambulances anymore, or when they do, the paramedic goes in and the rest of the crew stage outside unless needed or until needed. So a dynamic shift in our operations. And some of this has also changed operations for UAVs and departments. So remember, you're going to need to be dynamic and flexible in your thinking. Sharing best practices, sometimes sooner rather than later. It is definitely difficult in this heightened state of operations, but you know, and we're asking a lot of some of these departments to take just a few minutes to fill these surveys out that we're asking for, when they have such a high operational tempo with limited staffing right now. But that's going to be important for other agencies that may be hit later on down the line. So we really appreciate them taking that time, sharing those best practices. You know, later on, we hope to have an after action report completed on this, because that again takes those best practices that we're learning, and we're putting that in the after action report, which isn't just the good, it's also the negative. We have to learn from mistakes and missteps, and things that didn't go right, just as we have to learn from the things that did go right. That's the only way we become better and more efficient in our future operations. And the goal there is it helps us create better standardization across the industry, across public safety. And now we can standardize our operations and procedures. And again, all of this for me is about saving lives of the public, police officers and firefighters, and working through that, sharing best practices, after action report and creating those good standards for us to follow only makes this technology even better at saving lives.
All right, thank you, Wayne. And moving on to our last poll, this should launch in just one moment here. Go ahead and click one of those options on your screen. The question is, has your department deployed UAVs for COVID-19? I'll give you guys about 30 seconds again here to answer that. All right, we'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and close this and show the results. All right, looks like 16% of you have already deployed UAVs, 56 have not, but are considering, and 28 have not and are not considering. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you. That's another good piece of information to have. Obviously, we're still all learning a lot about this particular topic and how to best utilize not only drone technology but new technologies as a whole. So now, have your iPhone or your Android devices ready, because we're going to go into the resource section, and there I will have more QR codes for you available. And that allows you then to directly get to those links or websites that we're talking. At this point, we would have had one of our public safety departments that were supporting on the DRP with us, but unfortunately, especially in this dynamic environment, they had to cancel their participation. We expected that we could run into this, so we didn't advertise it too much. But just know that we appreciate anyone that is not only being part of the disaster relief program, but actively utilizing drones for good purposes. So in the resources, you will get, I'm going to talk about the Geo Unlock a little bit more, some information about FAA COVID-19 SGIs, then the updated response use case, and as well as a link to a COVID-19 deployment survey that's outside of this DRP program for entities around the world. Again, the idea is we are going to be working on an after-action report with the communities to really get a much better idea of what can we do better as a community, as an industry, for the next disaster. First of all, let's quickly go to the Humanitarian Code of Conduct and that chart, that flow chart that we talked about earlier. You can get that information by utilizing this QR code. So if you use your camera function on your smart device, it should read it and it should pop up. Here are information about the Qualified Entities Program, the QEP. And as if you may know, our technology in 2014-15, we added the geofencing onto our drones. And that was, in essence, an educational tool for our consumer operators to realize that they may be operating in an environment that they're not supposed to be in, you know, close to an airport, maybe a national park, a temporary flight restriction. And so we wanted to help educate our customers and provide them with more information so that they understand that there is a greater system in place that allows or may not allow flight operation, which is governed by the FAA. But similarly, we also quickly realized that our public safety officials have to operate in those environments. They have to operate close by an airport or even on an airport, as we have seen. So we have to find a way to unlock their specific drones so that they can operate without having to go through a big process. And so we created the Qualified Entities Program, and it's a fairly simple program and documentation that a department can go through. If you have a COR 107, that's your first requirement. You have to be a government entity. We have terms and conditions, mainly to highlight that if you give away or sell your unlocked drone, it's your responsibility to make sure that it gets locked again. We don't want to have these devices out in the public fully unlocked. This is something that is applicable to you and your department. And obviously we need to know the flight controller serial numbers and the DJI accounts, because we created this kind of two key identification. So it has to be the right DJI account on the right flight controller in order for it to get unlocked. If somebody else uses their account, it will not be unlocked. So those are the information, and you can get the documents on how to go about it, what to fill out on this link. And it's not a large process, but absolutely one that the majority of our DRP partners are utilizing because they are operating in difficult airspace. And so having this available to them speeds up their operation. One tip in regards to the QEP, we ask for the flight controller serial number. And a lot of departments don't know what that is. It is the flight controller number that is inside your machine, and the only way to get it is if you connect everything, turn it on, and you go into the menu to the About section where you have all your flight controller information as well as firmware information, and right there is that number that you need. Now, the FAA has been also very responsive in regards to supporting public safety in regular operations as well as in COVID-19 situations. And the Drone Responders Group is a group of individuals from across the US and globally that have drone programs that come together, that share information and best practices. And in their resource center is a lot of really helpful information that Charles Warner has put together so that departments have access to it. And I highly recommend, if you're not yet a member of Drone Responders, please do. It's a free membership for public safety. And again, going into that resource center really has a lot of very helpful information on how you can potentially get a close proximity, low altitude, beyond visual line of sight waiver. What is the process so that your department could apply for one of those waivers much more effectively and in a shorter period of time than having to figure it out on your own. Again, this is about sharing the best practices that departments have made across the United States. And then this is the exciting document. This is our third version of the COVID-19 response use cases. It's also available in the handouts of this webinar, but it has a lot of helpful information, including more deep dives into use cases by departments. Very helpful document that has gotten a lot of praise over the last couple, 3 weeks, because that sharing of information component has been such a big help to many departments. And then, as I also mentioned, we do have a COVID-19 operations survey for departments that are not part of the DRP program. And this is a global survey, and it really allows us to get information about best practices, about what worked, what didn't work, what were some of the challenges, and how many times have you deployed, so that we can put all of this into an after action report that we will be working together with other stakeholders in public safety and the drone industry, because this is not just a DJI project. This is really the entire industry trying to figure out how can we best support a next disaster. And hopefully when we talk about disaster, it will be more of a localized situation, like an earthquake versus a global pandemic as we're experiencing right now. But we want to be prepared, and we'll want to get more information so we can improve as an industry, as a manufacturer, and as a vertical that truly is leading the way in how new technologies are helping to not only save every citizen's lives, but also mitigate the risk to our first responders. And that is a big driver for us to really strategically think about new solutions, better solutions, and better integration into a system. Having said all of that, now we're coming to the fun part, and that is the questions and answers.
All right. Thank you, Romeo and Wayne, for all of that information and the detailed resources that you shared. I've gone ahead, and in case anyone's missed it, I've added some of those resources links out that were included on those QR codes to the chat box. So feel free to go over there and grab some of those. Note that we're also going to be sending these slides out to everybody along with the recording after about a few days after this webinar. So you'll have access to all of those in addition to some of those links. It looks like we've had some questions coming in case anyone's forgotten. You can go ahead to the questions pane and type in any questions to that area that you would like to ask our panelists. We have about 13 minutes to dive into some of those. So Romeo and Wayne, let's go ahead and just get started. The first question I have that I think some people might have as well: can there be pre-recorded messages broadcasting through speaker systems with DJI drones?
That is a very good question. And yes, there's a couple of opportunities that you have. You have the ability to pre-record a message, and you can set it on repeat, and it will continuously repeat that message while you're moving. You also have the ability to say a message as you go. That is usually used in a more dynamic situation. We had this incident where an individual was about to commit suicide and jumping off a building, and the drone got to that individual much quicker than the forces on the ground, and so they had individual messages played to this individual to calm that person. So you have both options. Obviously, what you do want to do is you want to think ahead of time what kind of message you want to broadcast. Is there a potential need of having it recorded in multiple languages like Chula Vista did, and broadcast it so you're impacting a much broader community? It goes back to properly identifying what you're trying to do, what the outcome is. And one of the questions that has come up quite often is, well, why are we using a drone for this? We have speakers on patrol vehicles, we have a megaphone, we have speakers on helicopters. Yes, this is not a new use case. You're absolutely right. But utilizing a drone, you can get to places that you are unable to potentially go by foot or with a patrol car. And not every department has access to crewed aircrafts. So again, you gotta think this through and weigh out the options of what you have available.
And if I could also add, going back to what we said about lessons learned, and that media, public perception, we've seen, greater rather than enforcement, informational use is much more accepted and has been more useful.
Great, thank you both. Another question that came up was, does Chula Vista use a beyond visual line of sight waiver to deploy to 911 calls?
Yes, and they're very transparent about their program. In fact, if you do a Google search on Chula Vista Police UAV, it gets you to a site where they give you a lot of their statistics, a lot of their background information. They update their stats pretty much daily. And Chula Vista is part of the FAA IPP program through the city of San Diego. And through that program, the FAA is trying to learn much more how drones are being used, how can they be integrated into the greater airspace. And this program has been ongoing for a little bit over a year and a half. And initially, the deployment circle was fairly limited to line of sight. And in the meantime, Chula Vista has gotten a beyond visual line of sight waiver through the IPP program. But I do encourage you to go onto their website. Maybe we can put a link into the chat as well. And if you scroll down almost towards the bottom of the page, they have a statistics chart, and it shows how many times they have deployed the drone in the last 16 or so months, 18 months. And I think last time I checked, it was close to 2,200 times. How many times the drone was on scene first? And it's something, I think, above 50% of the calls the drone gets on scene first. How many times the drone has helped with an arrest? And if the drone was there first, how many seconds on average was the drone there before ground units arrived? And it's close to 30 seconds. And as you know, in a life and death situation, 30 seconds gives you already a lot more information to act upon and execute once personnel gets there. So very fascinating and a very different deployment methodology that we're seeing in Chula Vista through this FAA IPP program.
And if I could add two things to that, Romeo, this was a program that I tried to be a part of at my department as well, because I foresaw the ability to gather that information of what the incident is prior to a unit getting there, to either, as you said earlier, turn a unit around. And so now I'm limiting my response and getting resources back in service faster to be able to respond to the next emergency, or the opposite, I'm able to add additional units to the call if it's something that sounded minor, but actually is a lot more than what the initial calls reported were. And so I would also say, in regards to beyond visual line of sight, again, as Romeo mentioned, drone responders, Charles Warner has been working really hard to get this worked out with the FAA. And so that's why drone responders is a great organization to be a part of. And he's doing some really good work trying to get that next piece worked through for public safety.
Great, thank you both. And then this question, I'm assuming they're referring to UAVs as a whole, but the question asks, can these be used with certain communities at high risk? Some of the examples given were senior citizens, houses of worship, faith communities. Have you guys seen these being used so far in the field in any of those ways?
I think, go on, Chief.
Sorry, I have not. That's not necessarily something that, you know, that's more where you're getting into certain issues that probably departments don't want to get it into. Some of it starts to look a little more like they're enforcing beyond their scope. I think nursing homes, it's going to be a little difficult because, you know, they're going to be more of an inside population. And, you know, one of the struggles is trying to find a good solution for indoor flight. And it's just wouldn't be practical for something like a nursing home or a church. So have not really seen that, other than to maybe fly for security for the church or for the nursing home to help do, as Romeo mentioned, that overwatch ability for the site, or to communicate with people coming to the nursing home. I wouldn't see any other uses. Romeo?
No, you're absolutely right. What we did see, though, is we don't often talk about it, is the use of drones indoor. And we had use cases where they had to send the drone in first into a building or a home. They knew that somebody had passed away in there, but they wanted to just get a little bit more information before sending in an entire crew. So that's the closest. And of course, the homeless camp support and evaluation, that's another one of those use cases where the at-risks were addressed by the use of drones.
Awesome, thank you both. Another good question that I think a lot of people who are just starting to dip their feet into flying might have is, what would you recommend to someone looking to get started with their Part 107? You know, where does somebody go to navigate this, even on a lower or higher budget? You know, what are some of your recommendations for that process?
There are many ways to go about it. Obviously, the FAA has a lot of information on their website. Study guides, test guides. A lot of people can get most of everything they need from the FAA website. In the meantime, there have also been helpful guides published. If you do an Amazon search, you get a lot of different guides that are available for you to learn. There's also entities that provide 107 classes. The good thing about 107 is it's kind of like a standard. We know what we need to achieve, we know what we need to learn, and we know what a test looks like. If we pass that test with a certain degree of correct answers, we will become 107 certified. So that's that one level of standardization. Beyond that, we have a little bit of more of a gray area in regards to standards. If you're a public safety entity that is about to start or is thinking about starting a drone program, we also have a guide that we made available last year on how to best go about this process if you are a public safety department. And there are also a lot of departments that help with training new operators in the public safety space. Some departments, they have a 107 class for local fire or law enforcement departments, you know, once a month, so that they can come and learn from what they have already gone through and help these departments to do that process. Maybe Chief Baker has some additional recommendations.
I would definitely, like you said, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of good, you know, anything from online to in-person one-day classes for Part 107. I took a lot of promotional exams in my career and, you know, a lot of certification tests, including paramedic. And I can tell you, take that test seriously and study for it religiously, because it's not impossible, but it is a very challenging test. It's not that it's so much difficult. They do challenge you very well on the knowledge that they want you to have. And the next part to that is on training. Part 107 tells you where you can and can't fly and regulations, and satisfies the FAA, but it is not a how to fly course or test. So you need to definitely make sure you do training on the hands-on part, and I highly recommend and taught quite a bit with the Tello and using the controller that you can purchase that goes with it. The Tello is really resilient, takes quite a bit of a beating as you're learning, and can get right back in the air and fly. But it also handles much like the larger aircraft does. So it's a good trainer. As we often say, you know, you're learning to fly a propeller plane before a jet plane. So Tello builds your skills up so that later on, when you're spending a lot more money on larger aircraft, you have that basic skill set to go beyond.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely back you guys on the idea that training beforehand is critical for that test. You know, another recommendation that I always have is if you have a small airport nearby, a lot of times if there's a training facility there with just regular manned aircraft, you might be able to learn some of the basics like maps and stuff like that from just a manned aircraft pilot as well, from an instructor. So that can sometimes be a little more cost effective if you're looking for some training on that side. Awesome. So another question that we had coming in, are there any plans to make the Mavic 2 Enterprise with the loudspeaker attachment capable of two-way communications with a victim? And this will be our last question here. It looks like we're up against the hour.
Oh, that is a good question, and that's something that has come back as feedback several times over the last couple of years. Just to give a little bit of history, before we went to the Mavic 2 enterprise line, we really were thinking about what kind of capabilities can we add to the Mavic enterprise that would have an immediate benefit to public safety. And two things I pushed for really hard. One was the speaker and one was the spotlight. Obviously, oftentimes we operate in environments that are not as lit up. That could be indoor, but that could also be outdoors, nighttime operation with appropriate nighttime waivers, where a spotlight can help. And when we talked about the speaker, we initially didn't think there would be a need to have two-way communication. Also, it's a little bit challenging. If you're in flight, there's a lot of noise, obviously, from the aircraft, from the props, but also potential wind and the environment that would make it difficult. But then maybe it's a matter of landing the aircraft and having it close by, let's say maybe a victim. And so now you don't have the prop noise, and you could potentially do two-way communications. And that came up again, especially last year when we started looking at drones for medical purposes, to do triage for a large-scale incident. Let's say there is a big natural disaster and you have lots of victims, and you're trying to do remote triage. So there's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of thinking going on. Hopefully, this could be a future solution that could enable even more ways of utilizing this technology.
Great, thank you all so much for joining us.